More on that breaking news just in our newsroom. A judge dismissing the charges against both former FBI Director James Comey and New York Attorney General Letitia James. The judge finding the prosecutor in those cases, Lindsay Halligan, was illegally appointed, meaning any actions she's taken as acting U.S. attorney were unlawful. Courts and legal reporter with The Hill, Zach Schoenfeld, is with me now to help me break all of this down. Zach, all of this really hot off the presses. Let's start at the beginning with this breaking news on the judge throwing out the charges against former FBI Director James Comey and Letitia James, saying that Halligan is accused of lying to Congress, saying that, Comey lied to.
Okay, so this is absolutely brutal for Trump. Like, this is one of those courtroom moments that just completely blows up in his face. A federal judge just threw out the criminal cases against both James Comey and Letitia James, both of them gone, dismissed. And the reason? Because Trump's hand-picked prosecutor was illegally appointed. The judge said every single action she took, including getting those indictments, was an unlawful exercise of executive power. That's the exact language. Unlawful exercise of executive power. Trump spent months crowing about finally getting revenge on his enemies. He pushed his Attorney General Pam Bondi to prosecute these people. He posted on social media demanding action, quote, now with 3 exclamation points. He forced out a prosecutor who refused to bring these cases. He installed a loyalist with 0 prosecutorial experience. And then a judge looked at what they did and said, nope, you broke the law doing this. Everything is void. Can you believe this? Trump thought he had finally weaponized the Justice Department against his political enemies. He thought this was his big moment of revenge. Comey, the FBI director he fired, Letitia James, the New York Attorney General who sued him for fraud, both of them facing federal criminal charges. Trump was absolutely gloating about it. And now it's all falling apart, because his team couldn't follow basic legal rules about how you appoint prosecutors. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest, you can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right? Let's get back to the video.
If these prosecutions ever do get to trial, it certainly seems that there would be a long road ahead, even if they are revived someday.
Zach, I've got less than 30 seconds, but I do want to ask you, do you expect any type of legal action from either James or Comey back at the Justice Department because of what they called a vindictive prosecution?
They certainly may try, but at this point, I think that is still a bit unclear. We haven't heard from either of them vowing to do so. I think in those types of lawsuits, there sometimes can be a very high bar to bring them. But certainly that is going to be one of the questions now, as these cases, at least as of now, are fizzling out.
U.S. District Judge Cameron McGowan Curry didn't mince words in her ruling. She wrote that Lindsay Halligan, the interim U.S. attorney who brought these cases, has been unlawfully serving in that role since September 22, 2025. She said all actions flowing from Halligan's defective appointment, including securing and signing the indictments, were unlawful exercises of executive power and must be set aside. Must be set aside. That's judge speak for everything you did is void. Start over. You messed this up completely. And here's what makes this even more devastating for Trump. The judge pointed out that Halligan had, and this is a quote, no prior prosecutorial experience. She was an insurance lawyer. She was on Trump's personal defense team. She had never prosecuted a case in her life. And Trump made her the top federal prosecutor for one of the most important districts in the country, specifically, so she would go after his enemies. The previous prosecutor, Eric Siebert, refused to bring charges against Comey and James. He reportedly expressed doubts about the cases, so Trump forced him out. Within 48 hours of Trump posting on social media demanding prosecutions, Bondi installed Halligan, and 3 days later, Halligan indicted Comey. A few weeks after that, she indicted Letitia James. It was all done at breakneck speed with a prosecutor who had no idea what she was doing, and the judge saw right through it. She wrote that accepting the government's position would mean the government could send any private citizen off the street, attorney or not, into the grand jury room to secure an indictment, so long as the attorney general gives her approval after the fact. That cannot be the law. The judge is essentially saying Trump and Bondi tried to create a prosecutor out of thin air to go after Trump's enemies, and that's not how the American legal system works. You can't just appoint whoever you want to prosecute people you don't like. There are rules, there are processes, there are constitutional requirements, and Trump's team violated all of them. James Comey posted a video response after the ruling. He said, quote, "I'm grateful that the court ended the case against me, which was a prosecution based on malevolence and incompetence, and a reflection of what the Department of Justice has become under Donald Trump, which is heartbreaking." He said the message has to be sent that the President of the United States cannot use the Department of Justice to target his political enemies. Letitia James released her own statement saying she remains fearless in the face of these baseless charges. And now, Trump's team is scrambling. The White House is calling this a technical ruling and claiming Halligan was legally appointed. They're saying the Justice Department will appeal immediately. Attorney General Bondi announced they've made Halligan a special attorney so she can keep working on these cases somehow, but legal experts are saying the judge's opinion is tightly reasoned and likely to stand on appeal. Trump's revenge prosecutions just collapsed. His attempt to weaponize the Justice Department against political enemies just got slapped down by a federal judge, and the whole country just got a reminder that even a president who thinks he's above the law still has to follow basic rules about how prosecutors are appointed. This is a massive humiliation for Trump, and we're about to break down exactly what happened, why it matters, and what comes next. All right, let's dig into the details of how this all fell apart, because the story of these prosecutions is really the story of Trump trying to turn the Justice Department into his personal revenge machine and getting caught breaking the rules to do it. It starts back in January 2025 when Trump took office. He had a list of enemies he wanted prosecuted. James Comey, the FBI director he fired in 2017, was near the top. Letitia James, who sued Trump for business fraud and won a massive judgment against him, was also high on the list. Adam Schiff, who led the first impeachment against Trump, was another target. Trump made no secret of this. He talked openly about going after these people. He posted on social media about it. He told Attorney General Pam Bondi he wanted action. But here's the thing. Career prosecutors at the Justice Department looked at these cases and apparently didn't think they were strong. Eric Siebert, who was serving as interim U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia, reportedly expressed doubts about prosecuting Comey and James. He resisted the pressure from above, and that created a problem for Trump because he really wanted these prosecutions to happen. So what did Trump do? He forced Siebert out. On September 19, 2025, Siebert abruptly resigned. Reports indicated he was pushed out because he wouldn't bring the cases Trump wanted. And the very next day, Trump announced on social media that he was naming Lindsay Halligan as the new interim U.S. attorney. Now, who is Lindsay Halligan? She's a Florida insurance lawyer who was part of Trump's personal legal defense team during his criminal cases. She worked in the White House as a special assistant to the president, but she had never been a prosecutor. Never. Not a single criminal case. She had zero experience doing what U.S. attorneys do every day. But that didn't matter to Trump because he knew she would do what he wanted. She would prosecute his enemies, and that's exactly what happened. Halligan was sworn in on September 22nd. 3 days later, on September 25th, she secured an indictment against James Comey on charges of making false statements to Congress and obstruction. 2 weeks after that, on October 9th, she got an indictment against Letitia James on charges of bank fraud related to a mortgage application. Trump had his revenge prosecutions. But there was a problem, a big legal problem. Under federal law, there's a specific process for appointing interim U.S. attorneys. The Attorney General can appoint someone for 120 days. After that period expires, the power to appoint an interim prosecutor shifts to the federal judges of that district. This is a check on executive power. It prevents the Attorney General from just installing loyalists indefinitely without Senate confirmation. Siebert had been appointed on January 21st, 2025, so the 120-day clock started then. That clock expired on May 21st, 2025. At that point, the federal judges of the Eastern District of Virginia exercised their authority and selected Siebert to continue serving as interim U.S. attorney. This is a key point. After May 21st, the Attorney General no longer had the power to appoint someone to that position. Only the judges could do that. But when Trump forced Siebert out in September, Bondi didn't go to the judges. She just appointed Halligan herself, claiming she had authority under the same law that allows 120-day interim appointments. Judge Curry said that was wrong. The 120-day clock had already run out back in May. Bondi couldn't just restart it by forcing out Siebert. Once the judges had exercised their appointment authority, that authority stayed with them. Bondi had no power to install Halligan. The judge wrote that when the 120-day clock expired on May 21st, 2025, so too did the Attorney General's appointment authority. She said accepting the government's position would give the administration authority to evade the Senate confirmation process indefinitely by stacking successive 120-day appointments. The whole point of having the judges take over after 120 days is to prevent exactly what Trump tried to do, install a loyalist without Senate oversight. And here's what makes this even worse. The judge found that Halligan's appointment violated not just federal statute, but also the Constitution's Appointments Clause. That's the part of the Constitution that says principal officers of the United States must be appointed by the president with the advice and consent of the Senate. U.S. consent, U.S. consent, U.S. consent by the president with the 2 cent, essay tezukalausu, barrel pump, the lows make la hawatide pars, legistifice and torsud, theory share, to good suffice, the deployment tour, menso equalitiva now, the what's called a con and now, majchosgara kamiverdal, likilga, attorneys are principal officers, they exercise significant authority, they're supposed to be Senate confirmed. Halligan was never confirmed by the Senate, she was never even nominated. She was just installed by executive fiat. The judge said that's unconstitutional because Halligan's appointment was invalid. Everything she did in that role is void. And Halligan was the only prosecutor who presented the Comey and James cases to the grand juries. She was the only one who signed the indictments. There were no other prosecutors involved. So when her appointment got thrown out, the indictments went with it. The Justice Department tried to fix this after the fact. After Comey and James challenged the indictments, Bondi tried to retroactively ratify Halligan's appointment. She issued new paperwork saying Halligan was actually appointed under different legal authority, but Judge Curry rejected that completely. She wrote that the government has identified no authority allowing the Attorney General to reach back in time and rewrite the terms of a past appointment. You can't just change the legal basis for an appointment after someone has already acted under it. That's not how law works, and it gets worse. Even before this ruling, a magistrate judge last week criticized the Justice Department for, and this is a quote, a disturbing pattern of profound investigative missteps in the Comey case. There were problems with how the grand jury was handled, potentially improper evidence was shown. The whole prosecution was rushed and sloppy because they were so eager to get Trump's revenge that they cut corners everywhere. Now, the cases were dismissed without prejudice, which means they could theoretically be refiled, but for the Comey case, that's probably not going to happen. The charges against Comey were based on testimony he gave years ago. There's a statute of limitations on those charges. An invalid indictment doesn't pause the statute of limitations the way a valid one would. So the clock kept running, and it's likely already expired. Comey's lawyers are saying new charges would be time-barred. The Letitia James case is different because the alleged conduct happened more recently. Charges could potentially be refiled against her. Bondi announced that Halligan has been made a special attorney so she can keep working on these cases. But any new indictment would be subject to the same arguments about vindictive and selective prosecution that James has already raised. And it would require finding a properly appointed prosecutor to bring the case, which might be harder than it sounds given that career prosecutors apparently didn't want to bring these cases in the first place. The political implications here are massive. Trump sold these prosecutions as proof that he was holding corrupt politicians accountable. He compared them to the indictments against himself, claiming it was all about equal justice. But a Marquette University Law School poll last week showed Americans see right through that. By 16 points, 58-42, Americans said the cases against Trump's enemies were not justified. Meanwhile, by 10 points, they said the indictments against Trump himself were justified. So voters aren't buying Trump's framing. They see these prosecutions for what they are, political revenge disguised as law enforcement. And now a federal judge has confirmed that by throwing out the cases and calling the prosecutor's appointment unlawful, Trump's revenge tour just hit a very big wall. Okay, so let's break down what this actually means and why it matters so much. Because this ruling has implications far beyond just the Comey and James cases. It's a major blow to Trump's entire strategy of using the Justice Department to target political enemies. First, this is a public humiliation for Trump. He spent months bragging about finally getting his enemies indicted. He forced out a prosecutor who wouldn't do his bidding. He installed a loyalist specifically to bring these cases. He posted on social media demanding action. And now a federal judge has thrown it all out and said the whole thing was unlawful from the start. Trump looks like he doesn't know what he's doing. His team looks incompetent. They couldn't even follow basic rules about how to appoint a prosecutor. And the cases Trump was so excited about are now gone, at least for now. That's embarrassing. That's a failure. And Trump hates looking like a failure more than almost anything. Second, this validates what critics have been saying about Trump's Justice Department. People have been warning for months that Trump is weaponizing federal law enforcement against political opponents. They've pointed to the sudden indictments of people Trump has attacked publicly. They've noted how career prosecutors were pushed aside in favor of loyalists. They've argued this isn't about justice, it's about revenge. And now a federal judge has essentially agreed. Judge Curry found that Trump's administration broke the law in its rush to prosecute these people. She said the prosecutor had no lawful authority. She called the indictments unlawful exercises of executive power. That's a federal judge saying Trump's revenge prosecutions were illegitimate. That's a huge deal. James Comey put it perfectly in his statement. He said the message has to be sent that the president cannot use the Department of Justice to target his political enemies. And this ruling sends exactly that message. Third, this creates real problems for any future revenge prosecutions Trump wants to pursue, because now everyone knows the administration has been sloppy about following appointment rules. Defense lawyers in future cases will scrutinize every detail of how prosecutors were appointed. Any irregularity will become grounds for dismissal. Trump wanted to go after Adam Schiff next. He's talked about prosecuting other critics, but after this ruling, his team has to be much more careful about how they do it. And being careful and following rules isn't exactly Trump's strong suit. This ruling also shows that courts are willing to push back when the administration breaks basic legal requirements. Trump has immunity for many official acts thanks to the Supreme Court, but immunity doesn't protect you when you violate appointment laws. It doesn't shield you when you install prosecutors unconstitutionally. There are still limits on what Trump can do, and judges are still willing to enforce them. Fourth, this exposes how incompetent Trump's team has been in executing his agenda. Think about what happened here. Trump wanted Comey and James prosecuted. That was his goal. And his team messed it up so badly that a judge threw out both cases and called the whole thing unlawful. This wasn't a close legal question. The judge's ruling is straightforward. The 120-day clock expired. Bondi didn't have authority to appoint a new interim prosecutor. Halligan's appointment was invalid. Everything she did is void. That's not some obscure legal technicality. That's basic appointment law that any competent Justice Department would know. But Trump's team was so eager for revenge, so desperate to please him, that they cut corners and got caught. Halligan had no prosecutorial experience. She was picked because she was loyal to Trump, not because she knew what she was doing. And now that decision has blown up in their faces. Fifth, this matters for the broader question of whether anyone can hold Trump accountable. Trump has been operating under the assumption that he's untouchable. The Supreme Court gave him broad immunity for official acts. Republicans control Congress and won't check him. He thinks he can do whatever he wants. But this ruling shows there are still limits. Courts still have power. Judges can still throw out actions that violate the law. Trump might be immune from prosecution for many things, but he can't ignore basic legal requirements about how the government operates. When his team breaks those rules, courts can and will step in. That's an important reminder that the rule of law hasn't completely collapsed, even if Trump wants it to. 6. Let's talk about what happens next. The Justice Department says it will appeal immediately. Attorney General Bondi has made Halligan a special attorney, which is a different position that might let her continue working on these cases in some capacity. But legal experts are skeptical that the appeal will succeed. Judge Curry's reasoning is tight, the statute is clear. The 120-day clock is a real thing, and it expired. It's hard to see how the appeals court would reach a different conclusion on the basic legal question. And even if they do appeal, the cases stay dismissed while the appeal is pending. Trump doesn't get his revenge prosecutions back anytime soon. For Comey specifically, even a successful appeal might not matter because the statute of limitations has likely expired. You can't prosecute someone for something that happened too long ago. And if the original indictment was invalid, it didn't stop the clock from running. So Comey might be completely off the hook regardless of what happens on appeal. For Letitia James, there's more uncertainty. The alleged conduct is more recent, so statute of limitations isn't a problem. The government could theoretically get a properly appointed prosecutor to bring new charges, but James still has her arguments about vindictive prosecution, which she could use to fight any new indictment, and the optics of refiling would be terrible. It would look exactly like what it is. Trump refusing to give up on his revenge campaign, even after a court said the first attempt was illegal. Voters would see that, and according to polls, voters already think these prosecutions aren't justified. Pushing forward would just reinforce that Trump cares more about settling scores than actually administering justice. 7. This ruling should concern everyone regardless of political party. Because what Trump tried to do here, install a loyalist prosecutor to go after political enemies, is deeply dangerous to democracy. If presidents can just appoint whoever they want to prosecute their critics without following proper procedures, then prosecutorial power becomes a political weapon that any president can abuse. Democrats who might control the White House someday should be just as worried about this president as Republicans should be worried about what a Democratic president could do with such power. The system of checks and balances exists to prevent exactly this kind of abuse. And it worked here. The judge stepped in and said, no, you can't do this. You have to follow the rules. That's the system working. But it only works if judges are willing to enforce limits. And it only works if the public pays attention and holds leaders accountable when they try to abuse their power. 8. This is part of a broader pattern of courts pushing back on Trump's most aggressive actions. Just recently, courts blocked his attempts to use the military domestically. Courts struck down his birthright citizenship executive order. Courts are questioning his tariff authority. And now courts have thrown out his revenge prosecutions. Trump keeps running into judicial resistance when he tries to exceed his authority or break the rules. He's not getting the free hand he expected. And every time a court says no, it reminds everyone that there are still limits on presidential power in America. That's good for democracy, even if it frustrates Trump. Finally, let's be clear about what this ruling represents. A sitting president tried to use the Justice Department to prosecute his political enemies. He pushed out a prosecutor who wouldn't do his bidding. he installed someone with zero experience, specifically to bring the charges he wanted. And a federal judge said that was unlawful and threw the whole thing out. That's a stunning rebuke. That's a judge saying the president broke the law in his pursuit of political revenge. And it should be a warning to anyone who thinks Trump can just do whatever he wants without consequences. Trump's meltdown over this ruling is entirely predictable. He doesn't accept limits on his power. He doesn't accept that courts can tell him no. He'll claim this is a biased judge protecting criminals. He'll demand appeals. He'll keep trying to find ways to prosecute his enemies. But for now, at least, the rule of law has won around. James Comey and Letitia James are not going to prison on charges brought by an illegally appointed prosecutor, and Trump has been publicly humiliated by his own team's incompetence. Stay tuned, because this story is far from over. Trump's team will appeal. They might try to bring new charges, and there are still other people on Trump's enemies list he wants to prosecute. We'll be here covering every development, because this matters. This is about whether the Justice Department serves justice or serves as the president's personal revenge squad. And right now, a federal judge just made very clear which one it should be.